Welcome back to the Eldritch Hour, my frightful friends. I'm Lilith Fury, your Eldritch Queen of Horror, here to unravel the eerie origins of the stories you thought you knew. Tonight, we're peeling back the glittering surface of fairy tales to expose the blood-streaked roots beneath. You see, these beloved tales didn't start as sugary bedtime stories. Oh no. They were warnings, nightmares, and sometimes outright horror stories. Let's dive into the sinister history of fairy tales, their inspirations, their evolution, and their lasting influence on horror itself. Let's start with Little Red Riding Hood, one of the most iconic fairy tales. In its earliest versions, it was a chilling tale of predators, both literal and metaphorical. The 14th century Italian story, False Grandmother, introduced a cunning wolf who tricks Red into consuming her grandmother's remains. Gruesome, right? Charles Perrault's 17th century French version emphasized Red's naivety and included no heroic rescue. The wolf devours her, and that's the end. Scholars have long seen the story as a warning about predatory men, with Red representing innocence and the wolf as a symbol of danger lurking in society. Later versions, like the Grimms, softened the tale somewhat by introducing the huntsman. But even then, the wolf is sliced open, his stomach filled with stones, and he's left to die. A brutal ending for an already grim tale. Cinderella is another favorite with a dark past. Many cultures have their own version of the story, but they share a common thread: suffering, cruelty, and supernatural revenge. The Grimm's version is perhaps the most horrifying, with the stepsisters mutilating their feet to fit the glass slipper. Birds, loyal to Cinderella, not only expose their deceit, but later gouge out their eyes. In contrast, the Chinese tale has Cinderella being aided by her deceased mother, reincarnated as a magical fish. It's beautiful, but haunting. Her only family is literally the spirit world. These older versions remind us that the story isn't just about wish fulfillment, but also about justice, often served cold and bloody. And let's talk about Sleeping Beauty. The version you know, a sleeping princess awakened by true love's kiss, is a far cry from the ancient stories it draws from. The 1634 version is outright horrifying. In it, the princess isn't kissed, but raped in her sleep. And she only awakens when she gives birth to twins. Imagine the shock of realizing your slumber has been violated in the worst way. The story reflects the medieval fear of powerlessness and lack of control over one's fate. Later versions sanitize the tale, but the darkness still lingers in the symbolism of an unbroken curse. Some fairy tales are tied directly to real-world events, making their horror even more tangible. Take the Pied Piper, the story of a musician who lures away the town's children after being cheated out of payment. Sounds fantastical, but it may have roots in history. In 1284, over 130 children from Hamelin disappeared. Historians theorized they could have died from a plague, been recruited for a doomed crusade, or forced to migrate. The piper, with his magical flute, might symbolize death or manipulation. It's a grim tale of greed, betrayal, and consequences, and one that's echoed in films like The Company of Wolves, where music and hypnotic allure are used to sinister effect. Speaking of wolves, let's return to the trope of the wicked predator. Wolves in fairy tales, particularly in European folklore, symbolize danger, chaos, and the untamed wilderness. But in The Company of Wolves, Angela Carter reimagines the wolf as a metaphor for sexual awakening, blurring the lines between monster and man. This 1984 film adaptation highlights the psychological horror of transformation and desire, making it a brilliant modern take on the fairy tale horror. Guillermo del Toro's Pan's Labyrinth also leans heavily into the fairy tale aesthetic, blending fantasy with brutal historical reality. The faun and the pale man feel like they've stepped right out of ancient folklore, their monstrous forms a warning to those who stray from the path. Witches are another mainstay in fairy tales, and their stories are some of the most chilling. Hansel and Gretel presents a cannibalistic witch who lures children to her candy-coated house, a symbol of temptation and destruction. But witches in folklore weren't just villains. They reflected real fears at the time. During the witch hunts of the Middle Ages and Renaissance, accusations of witchcraft led to thousands of executions. These anxieties bled into fairy tales, where witches often represented the dangers of disobedience, greed, or straying too far from home. The 2020 film Gretel and Hansel brilliantly modernized this, exploring themes of power, corruption, and survival while maintaining the original tale's chilling atmosphere. Fairy tales also inspired some of the darkest modern horror. Take Snow White. In the original Grimm story, the evil queen is being punished by being forced to dance to death in red-hot iron shoes. It's a horrifying end that Disney glossed over. But films like Snow White, A Tale of Terror, this 1997 film dives deep into the gothic horror of the tale, making the queen a tragic yet terrifying villain. And let's not forget Beauty and the Beast. While it's a story of redemption, it also carries themes of entrapment, Stockholm Syndrome, and transformation, a fertile ground for horror interpretations. Why do these dark tales endure? Experts like Maria Tatar and Jack Zippis argue that fairy tales speak to universal fears and desires. They reflect our struggles with power, morality, and the unknown. Horror films tap into these same themes, which is why the two genres blend so well. From The Witch to Pan's Labyrinth, modern horror draws on fairy tales to explore human vulnerability and resilience. Even seemingly lighthearted films like Coraline or The Nightmare Before Christmas borrow heavily from these dark roots, proving that fairy tales and horror are two sides of the same coin. So, the next time you hear a bedtime story, remember, they weren't always meant to lull you to sleep. These tales were warnings, allegories, and sometimes outright nightmares designed to haunt you. I'm Lilith Fury, and I'll see you next time in the shadows. Until then, stay spooky, my friends.